The courtroom was packed tighter than usual that morning, and a restless hush hung over the space like a mist. Lawyers shuffled their papers, clerks tapped at keyboards, and the steady ticking of the antique wall clock kept everyone aware of the passing time. At the front sat Judge Harold Granger, a man known for his sharp tongue, quick judgments, and very little patience for nonsense. His courtroom was his kingdom, and his gavel was law. He adjusted his glasses and leaned forward, squinting at the docket in front of him. The door at the back opened, and all eyes turned. A boy, no more than 16 or 17, stepped in. He wore a dark blue hoodie over a crisp white shirt, faded jeans, and sneakers that squeaked slightly with every step. No one moved. No one expected him. His youthful face was calm, but his eyes held something far more complex, something fierce, observant, almost calculating. Whispers fluttered through the crowd like autumn leaves in a gust of wind. "Is he lost?" Someone muttered. "Where's his lawyer?" Another asked. The bailiff glanced toward the judge, uncertain whether to stop the boy. But the teen walked straight to the front as if he belonged there. He placed a sleek black binder on the table meant for the defense and stood tall, his eyes locking with Judge Granger's. The judge narrowed his eyes. "Young man," he said, his voice echoing through the room, "I don't know who let you in here, but you're clearly in the wrong place. The youth courtroom is down the hall." A few chuckles bounced around the room. The boy remained steady. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm and clear, "my name is Elijah Quinn. I'm here representing the defendant, Mr. David Cole." The chuckles stopped. Judge Granger blinked. "Excuse me," he said, his tone laced with disbelief and irritation. "This isn't a school play, son. Where's Mr. Cole's real attorney?" Elijah calmly opened his binder. "Mr. Cole retained me privately. I have the legal documentation here, signed and notarized. According to state law, anyone who passes the bar is legally permitted to represent clients, regardless of age. I passed the bar last year. I also hold a degree in law from an accredited institution. All of this can be verified. I've already submitted copies to the clerk's office." Judge Granger sat back in his chair as though he'd been slapped with a wet cloth. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Elijah looked young enough to still be in high school, yet here he was speaking with the composure of a seasoned litigator. The judge looked toward the clerk, who gave a silent nod. It was true. The papers were filed. Everything checked out. "I don't care if the documents are real," the judge snapped, trying to maintain control of the room, and his authority. "This is highly irregular. You expect me to believe you're qualified to conduct a criminal defense trial in my courtroom?" Elijah's lips pressed into a thin line. "With respect, Your Honor, I've spent every day for the past 5 years studying criminal law, constitutional law, and courtroom procedure. I've memorized the federal and state penal codes, and I've conducted over a dozen mock trials with veteran attorneys. Mr. Cole chose me because he believes in my ability to defend him. All I ask is that you allow me the same opportunity any other attorney would have." It was said without arrogance. Just clarity. Confidence. Judge Granger stared at him for a long time, drumming his fingers on the arm of his chair. The gallery watched like it was a courtroom drama come to life. The judge exhaled. "Very well, Mr. Quinn," he said slowly. "You may proceed. But be advised, I run a tight courtroom, and I will not tolerate games. One misstep and you're out." "Understood, Your Honor." As Elijah sat down, the prosecutor, Ms. Vega, leaned forward at her own table, sizing him up like a lion eyeing a particularly bold antelope. "Well," she said with a thin smile, "this should be interesting." The trial began, and the first hour was a blur of opening statements. Elijah's delivery was calm and organized. He didn't try to impress with big words or theatrical flair. He let facts speak. He told a story that was direct and logical, painting a picture of his client, a middle-aged man accused of embezzling funds from the company he worked for, not as a criminal, but as someone caught in a larger web of mismanagement and corporate scapegoating. Still, the courtroom remained skeptical. Some of the jurors seemed more fascinated by the novelty of Elijah's presence than by the content of his arguments. Even Judge Granger found it hard not to let his judgment be clouded by what he saw as a child pretending to be something he wasn't. It wasn't until Elijah began cross-examining the first witness, a senior executive from the plaintiff company, that the mood in the courtroom began to shift. The executive spoke confidently at first, explaining how the financial irregularities had been discovered and how David Cole had been the only person with access to the accounts. Elijah listened attentively, then rose to approach the witness stand. He carried only a single piece of paper with a few printed lines. "Mr. Bennett," Elijah said, "you testified that the access logs showed Mr. Cole logged in on the evening of March 17 to transfer the missing funds. Is that correct?" "Yes. Would you mind telling the court what your company uses for access verification?" "We use fingerprint authentication on all company devices." "Interesting," Elijah said, pacing slowly. "Is it true that Mr. Cole broke his wrist on March 12 and had a cast on his dominant hand for 6 weeks?" There was a pause. The executive blinked. I'm not sure. I have hospital records here," Elijah said, holding up the paper. "They show he was admitted to County General on March 12 for a fracture. That would make it physically impossible for him to use the fingerprint scanner registered to his right hand." Ms. Vega objected, but Elijah was ready. He handed over the hospital document. Judge Granger examined it. Objection overruled. "Continue, Mr. Quinn." "Mr. Bennett," Elijah said, locking eyes with the executive, "if Mr. Cole was physically incapable of accessing the system that night, then isn't it possible someone else used a cloned fingerprint or had administrative override?" The witness began to stumble. I suppose, I'd have to check with IT." "That won't be necessary," Elijah said smoothly. "Because I already did. And I'll be calling your head of IT to the stand this afternoon." The courtroom buzzed again. The judge banged his gavel to quiet the gallery. Over the next 3 days, Elijah dismantled the prosecution's case piece by piece. His arguments were clear and methodical. He anticipated objections. He handled surprise witnesses with poise. And every time he approached the bench or addressed the jury, the skepticism in their eyes melted a little more. By the time he gave his closing statement, even Judge Granger looked genuinely contemplative. The teen had gone from a curiosity to a force of reason in the courtroom. Elijah's voice rang out with calm power. "This isn't about age. This isn't about image. It's about truth. About fairness. Mr. Cole is a scapegoat for a system that refuses to take responsibility for its own flaws. I've shown you inconsistencies, contradictions, and holes that cannot be explained away. My client is not perfect. But being imperfect is not a crime. The evidence against him crumbles under scrutiny. And I ask you, on the basis of what you've seen, heard, and now know, to return a verdict of not guilty." When he sat down, even Ms. Vega nodded to him, a silent acknowledgement of his performance. The jury took 5 hours to deliberate. When they returned, the courtroom braced for the verdict. "Not guilty," the foreman announced. Gasps echoed. David Cole broke down in silent tears. Elijah closed his eyes briefly, then nodded, not in celebration, but in peace. He had done what he came to do. Judge Granger stared at him long and hard. Then, to everyone's surprise, he stood. "Mr. Quinn," he said slowly, "I owe you an apology. I misjudged you before you spoke a single word. That is a mistake I won't make again. You are one of the most prepared, composed, and intelligent attorneys I've seen in this courtroom in years, regardless of your age. You have a remarkable future ahead of you." Elijah nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Your Honor." As the courtroom emptied, a buzz followed him. Journalists, curious attorneys, and even jurors wanted to shake his hand, ask him questions, learn more. But Elijah didn't stick around for praise. He packed his binder, shook Mr. Cole's hand, and quietly walked out the way he had come in, without fanfare. The boy everyone had mocked had just rewritten the rules. And the judge who laughed. He would never forget the day he met the genius in disguise. The news of Elijah Quinn's courtroom victory spread like wildfire. Within hours, video clips, news articles, and tweets showcasing the teenage legal prodigy flooded the internet. Local news anchors couldn't stop marveling at how a teenager had walked into a courtroom, outmaneuvered a professional prosecutor, and secured a full acquittal for a man most had assumed was doomed. His face, once anonymous, now appeared on TV screens and social media feeds across the country. Words like genius, legal prodigy, and young phenom followed his name in every headline. But Elijah wasn't basking in the attention. After leaving the courthouse, he didn't join the celebratory crowd waiting outside. Instead, he took a quiet cab ride home, eyes fixed on the cityscape. His mind wasn't on the praise or the camera lights. It was on the next steps, the cases he still had to handle, the people he still needed to help, and the system he was determined to challenge. Home was a small, book-filled apartment on the top floor of a quiet building in a modest part of the city. It wasn't glamorous, but it was filled with warmth. His mother, a kind-faced woman with tired eyes and a soft smile, met him at the door. She didn't say a word, just opened her arms and hugged him tightly. No celebration, no confetti, just understanding. "I saw the whole thing," she whispered. "You were incredible." Elijah pulled back, eyes sincere. He deserved to be free. They were going to ruin his life. She nodded. "You saved him, Eli." Saving people, that was what it was always about. Not fame, not clout. His mother had worked 2 jobs to support them after his father passed when Elijah was only 6. She cleaned offices during the day and waitressed at night. The law had entered Elijah's life the day she came home in tears after being wrongly accused of stealing at one of her jobs. They couldn't afford a lawyer. The accusation ruined her reputation, and they lost her income from that job. Elijah never forgot the look in her eyes, that combination of helplessness and rage. He had sworn then that he would learn the law himself. Not just learn it, master it. By 12, he was reading law books most college students avoided. By 14, he was sitting in on community court cases. He was offered an online college scholarship based on his test scores and academic submissions under a mentorship program for gifted students. By 15, he passed the bar through a special legal loophole in his state that didn't specify a minimum age, provided educational and test qualifications were met. And now, at 16, he had won his first full courtroom trial. But now the world knew. And with that came consequences. The next morning, a black car waited outside his building. A man in a sleek navy suit knocked on his door, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Elijah Quinn?" the man asked. Elijah nodded. "I'm Mitchell Kane. I represent Fenwick and Blackwell. We're one of the top law firms in the country. The partners watched your courtroom performance. Let's just say, they were impressed. Very impressed." He handed Elijah a crisp envelope. Inside was a formal invitation to an interview for a junior associate position, plus a scholarship offer to any Ivy League school he wished to attend, fully paid. Elijah looked at the paper, then back at Kane. "Why?" Kane tilted his head. "You're a once-in-a-generation talent. We want you on our side before someone else grabs you." Elijah didn't smile. "I didn't do that for attention." "Of course not," Kane said quickly. "But talent like yours deserves the best platform. We can give you that. You don't belong defending people from the slums. You belong in the big leagues." Elijah's jaw tensed. "Mr. Cole wasn't from the slums. And neither is Justice." Kane's grin faltered. "Just think about it. We'll be in touch." Elijah closed the door and dropped the envelope on the counter. He felt a pit in his stomach. Something about Kane's pitch had made his skin crawl. But there was no time to dwell. Because the next day, someone else came knocking. Not to offer a job, but to challenge him. It was Judge Granger. Not in his robe, not behind his bench, but standing at Elijah's front door with a file in his hands. "I know this is unusual," the judge said. "But I thought you might want to see this." Elijah took the file and opened it. Inside were documents from a new case, a boy, just 13, arrested for vandalism and theft. But the paperwork was messy, the evidence questionable, and the charges severe. It smelled like another miscarriage of justice. "I've seen what you can do," Granger said. "I want to see what you'll do with this." Elijah didn't hesitate. "I'll take the case." The next week, Elijah walked into a juvenile courtroom where no one took him lightly anymore. The bailiff greeted him with a respectful nod. The prosecutors eyed him warily. But the boy on trial, Miguel Alvarez, looked at him like he was the only person in the world who might actually care. Miguel came from a troubled background, raised in foster homes, bounced around schools, labeled a troublemaker since age 8. The charges claimed he broke into a store and stole electronics, but Elijah quickly discovered the surveillance footage was blurry, and the timeline didn't match Miguel's alibi. Worse, Miguel had an older cousin who looked almost identical to him, and had a long rap sheet. Elijah interviewed store employees, cross-referenced timestamps, and pulled security logs from nearby buildings. He found a neighbor who saw Miguel at home during the alleged theft window. And he uncovered inconsistencies in the store owner's statement, details that changed between the police report and courtroom testimony. In court, Elijah didn't shout. He didn't brag. He asked questions, sharp ones. And slowly, the prosecution's case unraveled. Miguel was acquitted. This time, no cameras waited outside. No journalists. But Elijah didn't care. Miguel's silent nod of gratitude, the way his shoulders finally relaxed, that was enough. But the more cases he took, the more enemies he made. Soon, people in power began to question his legality. Anonymous complaints were filed about his qualifications. Old loopholes were being challenged. Too young to practice, they claimed. A disruption to legal order, they argued. Some said he was reckless. Others called him a media stunt. Elijah stood before a review board one morning, where a panel of senior attorneys and judges questioned his practice rights. Their tone was cold, formal. "Young man," one woman asked, "do you understand the risk you pose by representing clients when you're still a minor?" Elijah sat straight. "I understand the risk of people not being represented at all. That's a far greater danger. And you believe you're equipped to carry the weight of justice on your shoulders. I believe justice should be carried by whoever is strong enough to lift it. Age doesn't determine strength. Truth does." There was silence. Then the panel recessed for deliberation. Hours passed. When they returned, the lead judge spoke. "Your conduct has been professional. Your results are undeniable. But we will be reviewing current state legislation to reconsider age policies. In the meantime, you are permitted to continue practicing under provisional license. You will be subject to peer supervision." It wasn't a full victory, but it wasn't defeat either. Elijah walked out of that building knowing one thing: they were watching him now. Closely. But he didn't slow down. He took more cases. Poor families. Immigrants. Forgotten people. He did the work others ignored. He faced off against powerful firms, corrupt landlords, and abusive guardians. And each time, he grew stronger. Eventually, even the big firms stopped trying to recruit him. They realized he wasn't for sale. One day, months later, as he sat reviewing documents in a cafe, a young girl approached him. Maybe 9 or 10, nervously holding a flyer. It was a drawing, stick figures under a courtroom with the words, "Elijah the Hero," in crayon. "My brother says you're the reason he didn't go to jail," she said. "I wanna be like you." Elijah took the drawing, his throat tightening. "You can be," he said quietly. "And better." Because for Elijah Quinn, being a genius attorney wasn't about outsmarting a courtroom. It was about restoring faith in something people had lost, that the law could be used not just to punish, but to protect. And he was just getting started.